Hello, I'm Anthony. I'm going to show you a nice little trick in Groove Agent today to get the most out of your pattern banks. We're going to start off this little demo today with the Bouncy Vibrations expansion set. So I started out writing this piece a couple of days ago, and the only thing that I really had in mind when I started with the blank project was that I wanted a trap feel to the sound of the rhythm. I hadn't decided what rhythm I was going to use, but I wanted a trap feel. So I went to the Bouncy Vibrations expansion. That's what that does. And I started at the top, auditioning very quickly each of the different kit sounds. Now, by the time I got down to Grasshopper Dance, which is where we're going to start today, we had a basic groove that sounded like this. So really I'm concentrating on predominantly the kick, snare, hats, the really basic core components of the drum rhythm. But I was quite happy with that sound, so I thought, right, that's where I'm going to go. That's where I'm going to start my experiment today. But I didn't particularly like that groove or any of the grooves associated with this kit. So we're going to take the sounds from the Grasshopper Dance kit, and that's these things. And now I'm going to use a completely different drum library to overlay a new pattern on top of these sounds. So I'm going to abandon the Bouncy Vibrations patterns entirely. If you go to your agent and right click, you can just load a pattern group, which just contains the rhythmic information that's going to be loaded into the patterns, and we'll leave all of the sounds completely alone. And then I randomly just opened a folder. I happened to click on Metronomic Cinema. It could have been any of them. Now, it took 3 or 4 attempts for me to find a rhythm that I liked. I'm just going to jump straight to the one because that auditioning process is tedious. But I'm going to choose the Casbah Crush pattern. Just going to load that into the pattern banks. So there's no visible change from the instrument tab. But if you jump over to the pattern tab, now all of these grooves are different. These have been loaded in from the Metronomic Cinema library. And so Groove 4 now contains a different pattern, but using the same sounds, and this is what we've got. So I found this rhythm much more interesting. There are a lot of things wrong with it, and that's what we're going to fix today. But I'm much happier with that as a starting point. So this is the step-by-step process to get a working rhythm out of this sound. The first thing that you want to do is audition all of the patterns very quickly to see what you've got. And it's not going to take you very long to figure out that there's melodic information in these grooves. I generally don't like working with melodic information in Groove Agent. I just want it to be a rhythm. There's an example. So let's throw away everything that has any melodic content. I'm going to jump over to our instrument tab. Now you can see that you've got 3 different groups in here, so potentially 3 times 16. In fact, the third group only has half of its patterns filled, but all of this stuff, these synth slice pads, contain melodic information. I'm not interested in any of that. We're going to mute these pads en masse, and the easiest way to do that is to right click on any of the pads, select all pads in group. So the group is the 16, the block of 4x4, and then you just press M on your keyboard. That mutes all 16 pads. Head over to the second group. These are all melodic as well. Not interested in any of this stuff. Right click, select all pads in group, M, and then group 3, which contains the substance of the kit. We need to be a little bit more careful here. It turns out that the only pads we need to delete are the bass sound on C2 and the synth sound on C#2. I'll just turn this up a bit now that we're not listening to whole rhythms. So let's mute those 2 individually. At this point, those patterns are going to sound very different because you've just thrown away all that melodic content. Same core rhythm, but now that bass sound that happened at the beginning of the Groove 2 pad is missing. It's not there anymore. Okay, so a couple of minutes of auditioning. I've listened to each of the grooves and I like Groove 4. That's where I'm going to start building my kit from. I'm going to pick that up and drag it into Cubase. Now, because I'd already done some work with this kit, I already had a drum map assigned when I just dragged that pattern up. I've deleted the drum map so that you'll see what this looks like as it comes out of Groove Agent for the first time. If you have a look in the editor page, it's just regular key information, and we're going to leave it like that for now. We don't need the drum map just yet. Now, I'm not done with this pattern because even though that groove is fine and it's a good place to start from, if we have a quick listen to groove number 1. I really like that shaker sound. I want to get that in on the pattern as well. And this is a really nice trick for building an almost infinite variety of patterns very quickly. I'm going to pick up groove number 1. I'm going to drag it over the top of the existing groove. So now I have 2 grooves laid on top of each other. Can you see that the original groove is only 4 bars long? I'm going to double it and then bring the new groove back in over the top. If I press play now, Cubase will play both of those rhythms simultaneously, but there are going to be issues because those patterns are going to conflict in some ways. So we're going to solve all of those problems. Let's have a very quick listen to what we've got so far. Can you hear those kicks thudding against each other? So it's a bit of a hot mess. Bear with me though, this approach does work. We're just in the construction phase at the moment. The next thing that I want to do is merge all of that MIDI information together. We go into the MIDI menu, I can say bounce MIDI, and now those overlaid MIDI parts, you get in the hash lines saying there's more than one thing here. They've all been merged together, and this single MIDI part contains all of that note information. These are all really standard operations. You can basically have a tick list of all of these steps one by one and apply them to any number of different patterns that you overlay on top of each other. This is all going to work very, very often. You need a little bit of discretion right at the outset to choose the patterns that you think are going to work well together, but it's really not rocket science. Okay, so let's zoom in and see some of the problems that we've got. Can you see all of these overlapped notes? This is 2 kick drums overlapped on top of each other. Here we've got a kind of woodblock effect. We don't want any of that. We basically just want one of those hits, not both of them. And I kind of don't care which one. You're going to get a little bit of the groove from one pattern and a little bit from the other, but trust me, you can really paint with very broad brush strokes here and all of this will work. So the first thing that we're going to do is a function called delete overlaps mono. It's actually in your options, it's down here on the left hand side. I've got a keyboard shortcut set up for it. All you need to do is make sure that you don't have any MIDI events selected in your MIDI part. Execute delete overlaps mono. And what that does is looks for instances of the same note at the same time, basically overlap notes in any given MIDI part. Delete overlaps poly is an entirely different thing. That will look for any note happening at a moment in time. We don't want to mess with that at all. Really very, very different operations. So delete overlaps mono has just solved that problem for us. We have 2 notes here. One of them is very tiny, but they are actually adjacent. They're not overlapping. We're not done there though. We want to get rid of those tiny little notes because they're effectively like false artifacts. I don't want both of these kick drum sounds. I only want one of them. The easiest way to do that is after you've executed a delete overlaps mono, if you have 2 notes that are very close to each other, I have a macro called delete tiny notes. Now my patrons and channel members have access to all of my logical edit information and all of my macros, but the delete tiny notes function is here. I don't actually know if this comes with the core Cubase set because I've basically reassigned all of these presets just how I like them. So here's the delete tiny notes function, and it's going to look for any note that's 12 ticks or smaller. A tick is a very small period of time, but it's going to catch these. So once again, click in the background to make sure that it's going to operate on the entire MIDI part. Got another keyboard shortcut set up for this. And now you can see all those tiny little notes have disappeared. So at this point, with that very simple set of cleanup operations, let's have a listen to what the groove sounds like so far. Much better behaved, but there are still a few problems that I'm identifying. I'm hearing that there are still issues here, but my first suite of cleanup operations hasn't caught everything. So now I'm going to have to listen to each one of these sounds to figure out what else might be wrong, what other stuff I need to do to clean this pattern up. The first thing that I identified was that D2 and D sharp 2 are very similar patterns. They're both djembe patterns. D2 is shorter. D2 is the longer version. You definitely don't want both of those playing simultaneously. That's going to create weird phasing issues. So this is a manual operation. I simply went through and deleted one of these, and I chose to delete. In each case where I found a duplicate, I deleted the long version. We're dealing with an 8-bar part, so it's really not going to take very long to go through and manually find each one of these instances and get rid of them all. Quick listen to that. So now that I'm focusing on the djembe and listening to that particular aspect of the sound, I can tell that that's definitely cleaned up a little bit. What else can we find? These really long notes are an artifact of those two grooves being from completely different expansion sets. And in fact, all of these long note sounds really don't deserve such a place in the sound. So I decided to just throw them all away. Clean things up a bit. The next thing that I found was that these G-sharp 1 and A1 notes were too similar to coexist. I want one of them, but not both. Again, completely arbitrary. I chose to throw away all the instances of A where those two notes overlapped. It would take you far longer to write a logical preset to do this stuff than it is to simply do it by hand. And the final thing that I was unhappy with was that right at the very beginning of the pattern, there's too much going on. And I decided that I didn't want that C-sharp 1 snare. So I threw that away, and don't forget we doubled this pattern. The snare came from the groove that was doubled, so there's going to be an offending item at bar number 9 as well. So with no more than maybe 10 to 15 minutes of primarily auditioning and then some very quick surgical editing, this is what the rhythm sounds like now. This is as good a time as any to create the drum map. So I'm going to head over to my Groove Agent track and I'm going to say create drum map from instrument, and that's that done. Head away from the MIDI part and back in to refresh Cubase because it doesn't do it automatically, which drives me mad. And here you can see the rhythm. And we're very nearly fully up to date actually. Just this morning I recorded this bass line. This is just to give you a flavour of what's kind of in my head as I'm listening to this groove. I was far more inspired by the drum rhythm that I have now than that simple one that we started out with straight from the basic Groove Agent expansion. So this is my bass line we've got so far. Pretty happy with how that's grooving. It's got far more motion and inspiration for me than the original library had. I'll now dip into the rest of the grooves in that particular pattern bank that I just happened to pick on initially, the Casbah, whatever it was, and see if there's any interesting stuff in the breaks or the fills or anything else that I can just throw in this really almost haphazard way. So I'm looking for these random collisions of different styles to inspire me. And then, as you saw, I'll go in and hand edit them to get them to the point where they're actually doing the job for me. Hope you found this video useful today. Please hit like if you did. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel as well. It really helps me out. I'll see you again. Thanks very much.